Aristotle. So that gives us a timeline. I'm going to use the board since we're and to make a story arc, we need another dimension. But one of the dimensions is going to be Aristotle's dimension, which is time. And this is the beginning of the story, and this is the end of the story. And during the story, stuff happens, right? And all we get from Aristotle is that the stuff that happens here in the first part of the story doesn't need anything in front of it. What happens in the middle of the story needs something in front of it and something after it. And what happens at the end of the story doesn't need anything after it, but does need something before it. Now, in classical theory, the other dimension is supplied by I'm blanking here. Conflict. This is classical theory. We're going to talk about some other possibilities for what I like to call the dramatic tension in the story. But in a classically structured story, you start out here with the first part of the story, which many call the exposition. Here you introduce the characters, here you introduce the setting, and here you introduce the conflict. And then the conflict escalates until something happens. And then it comes down. This is called the climax. This is called the denouement. The last part of the story. So, an example of a story with a classical structure is the story To Build a Fire by John, help me out. Jack London. Jack London, one of John's favorite stories. I'm going to read a little bit of it here. But this was written around 1902. It's about 6,000 words. I'm going to read 6,000 words, but I'll read the beginning. Day had dawned, cold and gray, when the man turned aside from the main Yukon Trail. He climbed the high earth bank where a little traveled trail led east through the pine forest. It was a high bank that he paused to breathe at the top. He excused the act to himself by looking at his watch. It was 9 o'clock in the morning. There was no sun or promise of sun, although there was not a cloud in the sky. It was a clear day. However, there seemed to be an indescribable darkness over the face of things. That was because the sun was absent from the sky. The fact did not worry the man. He was not alarmed by the lack of sun. It had been days since he had seen the sun. So here we are. We have one character. He's called the man. There's also a dog who shows up in the next paragraph. We're in the Yukon Territory, and it's the dead of winter. It's the Arctic period when the sun never comes up. And it's like 75 degrees below zero. And so there's our conflict. This guy is walking to a mining camp from another mining camp, and it's a very dangerous walk, some think. In fact, a little later on in the story, there's a memory that comes to him when he's preparing for this journey. One of the old fellows in the mining camp that he left tells him, "You don't want to go out there now. Just stay here, build a fire and stay warm." But he thinks he's experienced and prepared enough to do this. Anybody know this story other than John? Yeah.
We read it in school.
Yeah, this is a very
Never
famous-
travel alone when it's 50 below.
Yeah, it's a good story to read in the winter. It makes you want to stay inside. So off he goes on his journey. He
No, it's
so we start out with some moderate
You
level
mentioned
of
the title.
conflict.
Build a fire?
To build a fire. We start off about here. Change color. Make it thick. But you know, it's 9 o'clock, things going pretty well. Around noon, he stops and has lunch. He builds a fire. He warms himself up. Keeps going. He's on the side trail now. It's a little more dangerous than the main trail. And then he's following the creek, and he breaks through the ice. And his feet get wet, and his legs get wet, and it's 75 below. And it's a desperate situation. Now he needs to build another fire and to dry out his boots
And his feet.
and his feet. So he starts building that fire. Okay, things go pretty well. He gets that fire going. But, oh no, stupidly, he's built the fire under a tree. And when the heat rises, the branches let the snow go. And it drowns the fire out, goes out dead. Now I got some serious conflict. He's got to build another fire in another place. He starts doing that, but now he's too cold. He can't get the matches to light. And he goes through each match until he gets to the last one. And it lights, and he gets a little fire going. There are just 2 twigs burning. And there's some moss on it, and he pulls the moss away, and the fire goes out. Now we're in desperate straits. He decides he can run, and that'll warm his feet. You can imagine running on frozen feet. I think a bad knee is bad.
Yeah.
So he falls down. He's lying there in the snow, and he pictures himself as part of a search party coming to look for him. And he's sort of hovering over this scene, and they find him on the trail in the snow. And then the last part of the story that didn't belong here, the dog figures out this guy isn't going anywhere now. After a while, goes over to sniff him, smells death, and goes ahead on the trail to the camp on his own. Classic story arc. Partly because conflict, in this case man against nature, is the main driver, but partly because it was written before other things came along too.
And nature wins.
Nature won, yeah. This is not happy ending kind of story.
There's not all
Okay, so that's the graph for how we build this story. Now, in postmodern times, in recent times, many other things have been used for the dramatic conflict or the dramatic tension. I'm just going to call this tension. Here's another story. This is The School by Donald Barthelme. Anybody a Barthelme fan here? He was an academic, he taught at university. So I'm going to read this story. It's only about 3 pages. And I want you to identify for me what is the dramatic tension in the story. And how would the graph look? Okay, here's The School by Donald Barthelme. Well, we had all these children out planting trees, see, because we figured that was part of their education, to see how, the root systems, and also the sense of responsibility, taking care of things, being individually responsible. You know what I mean. And the trees all died. They were orange trees. I don't know why they died. They just died. Something wrong with the soil possibly, or maybe the stuff we got from the nursery wasn't the best. We complained about it. So we got 30 kids here. Each kid had his or own little tree to plant. And we got these 30 dead trees. All these kids looking at little brown sticks. It was depressing. So now we've introduced the conflict and the characters and the setting. It wouldn't have been so bad except that just a couple of weeks before the thing with the trees, the snakes all died. But I think that the snakes, well, there's the reason the snakes kicked off, and that was, you remember, the boiler shut off for 4 days because of the strike, and that was explicable. It was something you could explain to the kids because of the strike. I mean, none of their parents would let them cross the picket line, and they knew there was a strike going on and what it meant. So when things got started up again and we found the snakes, they weren't too disturbed. With the herb gardens, it was probably a case of overwatering. At least now we know not to overwater. The children were very conscientious with the herb gardens, and some of them probably, slipped them a little extra water that we weren't looking for. Or maybe, I don't know about sabotage, although it did occur to us. I mean, it was something that crossed our minds. We were thinking that way probably because before that, the gerbils had died, and the white mice had died, and the salamander. Well, now, they know not to carry them around in plastic bags. Of course, we expected the tropical fish to die. That was no surprise. Those numbers, you look at them crooked and they're belly up on the surface. But the lesson plan called for a tropical fish input at one point. There was nothing we could do. It happens every year. You just have to hurry past it. We weren't even supposed to have a puppy. We weren't even supposed to have one. It was just a puppy the Murdoch girl found under old Grizzly's truck one day, and she was afraid the truck would run over it when the driver had finished making his delivery, so she stuck it in her knapsack and brought it to the school with her. So we had this puppy. As soon as I saw the puppy, I thought, oh Christ, I bet it'll live for about 2 weeks and that